Morning light slipped quietly through the linen curtains, spreading a pale gold glow across the kitchen floor. Alara Quinn stood at the counter, watching steam curl upward from two untouched mugs of coffee. Rowan Hale was late again. Not dramatically, not suspiciously, just enough to leave a small space where certainty used to live. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when Rowan woke before his alarm simply to talk with her, when their mornings were stitched together with easy laughter and plans spoken half seriously over burnt toast. Back then, love had felt structured and dependable, like a bridge carefully engineered to hold whatever life placed upon it. Now, as Alara traced the rim of her mug, she struggled to name the feeling settling inside her. It wasn't fear exactly. Fear was sharp and immediate. This was heavier, slow, accumulating, almost invisible. Whatever it was, it had begun quietly. The front door clicked open. "Sorry," Rowan called, shrugging off his coat with practiced haste. "Early call with a client ran over." His voice carried warmth, yet his eyes flickered toward his phone before meeting hers. "You could have texted," Alara replied gently. "I know." It was chaotic. He crossed the room to kiss her cheek, and she noticed the gesture was precise, almost efficient. Affection reduced to habit rather than presence. Still, she smiled. Marriage, she often reminded herself, wasn't sustained by grand gestures, but by endurance and grace. Rowan gulped his coffee, barely tasting it. Within minutes, he was scanning emails, his attention already migrating elsewhere. "Big week?" she asked, something like that. He didn't elaborate, and Alara resisted the urge to press. Rowan had always been private about work, but lately his silence felt less like personality and more like distance. After he left, the apartment seemed unusually quiet. Alara gathered the mugs and tried to dismiss the faint tightness in her chest. She had deadlines of her own, branding concepts waiting for revision. But her concentration drifted. Love shouldn't feel like guessing, she thought. Later that evening, Rowan mentioned a new photographer his firm had hired for a campaign. "Sienna Voss," he said, loosening his tie. "She's remarkable. Sees angles no one else notices." Alara looked up from the sofa. "Sounds talented." "She is. Very driven." The admiration in his voice was subtle, entirely professional, yet he repeated Sienna's name twice more during dinner. Alara told herself she was reading too much into it. People talked about colleagues all the time. Still, she stored the detail away without meaning to. Days folded into each other, marked by Rowan's growing unpredictability. Meetings stretched late into the evening. Messages went unanswered longer than before. When he was home, he seemed mentally elsewhere, as if part of him remained tethered to unfinished conversations. Point one Thursday. Margot Hale invited Alara for lunch. Margot possessed the rare ability to observe without intruding, her perceptive gray eyes missing little. "You look tired," Margot said once they were seated near the window. "Just busy." Margot tilted her head slightly. "Rowan gets that way when he's avoiding something." Alara blinked. "Avoiding what?" "Difficult feelings. He always has. Even as a child, he distracted himself rather than confront what unsettled him." The comment wasn't accusatory, merely factual, but it lingered long after lunch ended. That night, Rowan fell asleep almost immediately, phone still in his hand. The screen lit briefly with a notification before dimming again. Alara wasn't close enough to read it, yet she noticed how quickly he stirred, turning the device face down even in sleep. The gesture was small, meaningless, perhaps, but weight rarely announced itself all at once. It accumulated grain by grain until suddenly it was impossible to ignore. The following week, Rowan canceled their standing Friday dinner. "Client emergency," he explained, already reaching for his keys. Alara nodded, masking disappointment with understanding. Marriage required flexibility. She believed that deeply. Still, she ate alone. The untouched second plate eventually returned to the refrigerator. Saturday morning brought another mention of Sienna, something about reshooting images to capture better emotional authenticity. Rowan spoke with an enthusiasm Alara realized she hadn't heard directed toward their own shared life in months. Later, While organizing a storage closet, Elara attempted to lift a sealed box of old design catalogs. It refused to budge. She adjusted her grip and tried again, muscles straining, but the weight held firm. Frustration flared unexpectedly. Rowan appeared behind her. "Why didn't you call me? That's too heavy. I thought I could manage." He moved the box effortlessly, sliding it aside. For a fleeting moment, Elara wondered why asking for help felt harder lately. Not just with boxes, but with emotions she couldn't quite articulate. That evening, Rowan sat beside her on the couch, scrolling through photos from the campaign shoot. "These are Sienna's," he said, angling the screen toward her. The images were undeniably striking. Honest expressions captured mid-laughter, shadows used like brushstrokes. She has a way of making people look understood. Elara studied the photographs, then Rowan's face illuminated by their glow. He seemed animated, engaged. She realized she missed being the subject of that attention. "Maybe you should meet her sometime," Rowan added casually. "I'd like that," Elara replied, though she wasn't sure why a faint hesitation threaded through her voice. Over the next few days, an unfamiliar quiet settled between them. Not hostile, not even noticeable to an outsider. Yet conversations shortened. Pauses lengthened. One night, as rain traced slow paths down the windows, Elara spoke softly into the dim room. "Are you happy, Rowan?" The question surprised them both. He considered it. "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" She searched his expression for something deeper, but found only mild confusion. "No reason," she said. He squeezed her hand, reassuring but brief, then returned his attention to a message vibrating across the table. Elara watched the reflection of the phone's light flicker in his eyes. For the first time, she became aware of a silence growing between them. Not empty, but dense, as though layered with words neither of them knew how to release. She lay awake long after Rowan slept, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Marriage had always felt like a shared shelter, yet now she sensed a wall forming somewhere inside it, thin but strengthening. Perhaps every relationship carried seasons of distance. Perhaps this was ordinary, and why as the hours drifted toward dawn, a quiet realization pressed against her thoughts. The hardest shifts rarely arrived with drama. They seeped in gradually, thickening the air until even love struggled to move freely within it. Elara turned toward the window, watching the darkness soften at its edges. Sometimes, she thought, the most dangerous changes are the ones you cannot prove, only feel, growing heavier day by day, until the weight settles so deeply you begin to wonder when breathing stopped being effortless. Itself in patterns, small, repeating fractures that Elara Quinn could no longer dismiss as coincidence. Rowan Hale had begun carrying his phone everywhere, even into rooms he once entered empty-handed. If it chimed, his attention snapped toward it with quiet urgency. When it remained silent, he checked it anyway, as though waiting for something only he understood. Elara told herself that modern life demanded constant connectivity. Yet the ease that once defined their home was thinning. One evening, while clearing the dinner table, she noticed Rowan smiling faintly at his screen. "What is it?" she asked lightly. "Just work," he replied, locking the phone before placing it face down. The answer was simple. Too simple. She washed the dishes slowly, listening to the hum of the faucet, wondering when curiosity had begun to feel like trespassing. A week later came the first unmistakable disappointment. Their anniversary approached quietly. 7 years marked not by extravagance, but by tradition. Every year, they returned to the same restaurant overlooking the river, where amber lights shimmered across the water and conversation always seemed to flow more honestly. Elara had made the reservation days in advance. 2 hours before dinner, Rowan called. "I hate to do this," he said, his voice tight with what sounded like genuine regret. "A client situation exploded. I can't get out of it." She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "Is it urgent?" "Very." There was a pause long enough for her to imagine the empty chair across from her. "Okay," she said at last. "We'll go another night. I'll make it up to you." "I know." After the call ended, the apartment felt unusually still. She changed out of the dress she'd selected and folded it carefully, smoothing the fabric longer than necessary. Marriage required patience, she reminded herself. But patience, she was learning, could grow heavy when carried alone. The following afternoon, impulse guided her downtown. Rowan had forgotten a portfolio at home. Important, he'd said, and she decided to deliver it personally, picturing his grateful surprise. The firm's lobby buzzed with purposeful energy. A receptionist directed her toward a glass-walled conference area. She spotted Rowan immediately. He stood near the windows, laughing. Not politely, not professionally, but freely, the sound unguarded in a way she had not heard in months. Across from him was a woman Alara recognized instantly despite never having met her. Confidence seemed to gather naturally around Sienna Voss. She spoke with animated precision, one hand sketching shapes in the air as though composing a photograph no one else could yet see. Rowan leaned slightly toward her, fully attentive. For a moment, Alara remained unseen. She watched the ease between them, the rhythm of two people comfortably engaged. Nothing inappropriate, nothing undeniable. Yet something inside her shifted. When Rowan finally noticed her, surprise flashed across his face before warmth replaced it. Alara, hey, you didn't have to come all the way here. I was nearby, she said, handing him the portfolio. Sienna stepped forward with an open smile. You must be Alara. I've heard wonderful things. Her tone carried effortless sincerity. And I've heard you're very talented, Alara replied. Rowan exaggerates, Sienna said lightly. Rowan did not deny it. The three exchanged brief pleasantries before Rowan was called away. As Alara turned to leave, she felt Sienna's perceptive gaze linger. Not intrusive, simply observant, as though she noticed details others overlooked. Outside, cool air brushed her face. She told herself she had witnessed nothing troubling. Still, the image of Rowan's laughter stayed with her during the entire walk home. That evening, she mentioned the visit casually. You seemed busy, she said. It's a demanding project, Rowan replied. You looked happy. He smiled faintly. I enjoy good collaboration. The word echoed in her mind long after the conversation ended. Days later, Kayla Mercer found her absent-mindedly stirring a cup of tea that had long since cooled. You're here, but not really, he observed. Alara attempted a smile. Caleb had known her long enough to detect the quietest disturbances. Have you ever felt something change? She asked slowly, without knowing when it began. All the time, Caleb said. The question is whether you talk about it or pretend it isn't happening. I don't want to accuse Rowan of something that might exist only in my imagination. Honesty isn't accusation, Caleb replied gently. It's protection, mostly for yourself. His words settled deep, unsettling precisely because they rang true. When she tried to raise the subject that night, Rowan listened but seemed puzzled. You think I'm distant? He asked, a little. I've just been overwhelmed. You know how cycles go. I do, she said. Though uncertainty threaded through her reassurance, he reached for her hand. You worry too easily. The comment was mild, almost affectionate, yet nudged the responsibility subtly toward her perception rather than his behavior. Later, while sorting laundry, Alara noticed a receipt slip from Rowan's jacket pocket. It listed a quiet restaurant across town, one they had never visited together. She studied the date, the night of their canceled anniversary. Her breath slowed. There could be explanations, colleagues, clients, convenience. Still, he had not mentioned it. Trust, she realized, was rarely shattered by one revelation. More often, it eroded beneath unanswered questions. That weekend, determined to reclaim normalcy, she suggested a morning walk. Rowan agreed, but spent much of it replying to messages, his apologies automatic, a crosswalk. She reached for his hand. He held it, yet his attention remained divided. For the first time, she felt unmistakably alone beside him. Later, while reorganizing the hallway, Alara attempted again to move the heavy storage box she'd struggled with days earlier. It resisted her efforts, stubborn and immovable. She pressed her palms against the cardboard, frustration rising unexpectedly. Why did everything feel heavier lately? Margot's voice drifted back to her. He distracts himself rather than confront what unsettles him. That evening, Rowan announced another late meeting, Sienna's name surfacing naturally within the explanation. Ilara nodded, but something within her had quieted, not into peace, but into awareness. When the apartment door closed behind him, silence expanded through the rooms. She sat by the window, watching dusk deepen into indigo, and allowed herself, at last, to stop minimizing what her instincts had been whispering. This was no longer simple imagination. It was the pressure of not knowing, the strain of smiling through uncertainty, the slow accumulation of moments that refused to align. The truth, whatever shape it took, had not declared itself. Yet its presence was becoming impossible to ignore, dense, unspoken, gathering weight with every unanswered question. And as Ilara wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill, one realization settled with quiet certainty. Not knowing was beginning to hurt more than any answer ever could. The change in Ilara Quinn was subtle but irreversible. She stopped reaching for reassurance and began observing instead. What once frightened her now sharpened her awareness. Rowan Hale did not notice at first. He mistook her quiet for acceptance. He left earlier in the mornings, returned later at night. His explanations remained consistent. Meetings, deadlines, revisions, but the emotional texture of his voice had altered. He spoke as though reciting facts rather than sharing his life. Ilara listened carefully, no longer interrupting with understanding nods or gentle jokes. She learned the rhythm of his evasions, how certain details never appeared twice, how Sienna Voss's name surfaced casually and vanished just as quickly. One evening, Rowan showered while his phone rested on the kitchen counter. Ilara was not searching when the screen lit up. The message preview appeared uninvited, bright against the dim room. Did you get home safe? I keep replaying today. There was no name attached, only a familiar photo thumbnail she recognized instantly. Her pulse slowed rather than raced. The moment did not shatter her. It clarified her. She did not open the message. She did not touch the phone. She stepped away as if leaving evidence untouched preserved her dignity. Later, Rowan joined her on the couch, speaking animatedly about logistics that no longer mattered. Ilara watched his mouth form words while her mind traced the edges of a truth she had been circling for weeks. That night, sleep avoided her. She lay still, listening to Rowan's breathing, wondering when companionship had transformed into parallel solitude. The next few days unfolded with careful precision. Ilara adjusted her schedule slightly, left work earlier, arrived home later. She noticed patterns aligning without effort. On Friday, Rowan said he had a late meeting downtown. Ilara nodded. I'll be out too. She followed him at a distance that felt surreal rather than dramatic. There was no chase, no rush, only inevitability. Rowan entered a small cafe tucked between quiet streets. Through the glass, Ilara saw Sienna, already seated, her posture relaxed, her attention fully attuned to his arrival. They did not touch. They did not need to. They spoke closely, faces angled toward one another, expressions unguarded. Rowan laughed softly, leaning forward, elbows resting on the table in a posture of intimacy Ilara recognized with painful familiarity. This was not secrecy born of passion. It was something more dangerous. Comfort. Ilara left before they did. She felt no triumph, only a heavy calm settling into her bones. That evening, Rowan returned later than expected. Ilara waited, lights low, her presence unmistakable. We need to talk, she said quietly. He froze, keys still in his hand. What's wrong? She gestured to the chair across from her. Seat. Rowan obeyed, confusion flickering into caution. I'm not asking, Ilara continued, because I want excuses. I'm asking because I deserve honesty. What is happening between you and Sienna? The silence that followed was dense, weighted. Rowan looked down, then away, then back at her. For the first time in weeks, he did not reach for his phone. It wasn't supposed to become anything, he said finally. Ilara inhaled slowly. That isn't an answer. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit she knew well. I didn't plan it. It just happened. What happened? She asked. Connection, he admitted. Understanding. I didn't realize how much I'd been missing it until it was there. The words landed without cruelty, which made them worse. Did you sleep with her? Alara asked. No, Rowan said quickly. I swear, it never crossed that line. She studied his face. He seemed truthful, but truth had become layered now, no longer simple. So you gave her what you stopped giving me, Alara said. Your attention, your presence. Rowan's shoulders slumped. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, she replied. That's what makes this unbearable. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away gently. The distance, the silence, the half-answers, she continued. They grew too big, too thick. I cannot carry them anymore. Her voice did not shake. That steadiness surprised them both. I was confused, Rowan said. I didn't want to choose before I understood what I was feeling. You already chose, Alara replied. You chose not to tell me. The truth settled between them, final and undeniable. Rowan swallowed hard. What do you want to do? The question exposed the imbalance he had created, placing the burden of resolution on her. I need space, Alara said. Not to punish you, to hear myself again. For how long? I don't know, but I know staying right now would erase me. She stood and gathered a small bag she had prepared earlier, movements calm, deliberate. Rowan watched helplessly. I never meant for it to go this far. Alara paused at the door. Neither did I. That's how these things grow. Outside, the night air felt sharp, cleansing. Each step away from the apartment lightened something inside her. Even as grief pressed close, she did not feel victorious. She felt awake. As she walked into the darkness, one truth followed her with unmistakable clarity. Love had not broken in a single moment. It had collapsed slowly under the weight of what was left unsaid. And now that weight, finally named, could no longer remain where it was. Some endings, she realized, are not conclusions at all, but the first honest breath after holding one too long. Time did not heal Alara Quinn so much as it rearranged her. Days passed, then weeks, each one teaching her how to exist without the constant effort of deciphering someone else's silences. She stayed in a small, sunlit apartment loaned by a friend, sparsely furnished but calm. Mornings were hers again, unrushed, uninterrupted. She returned to her work with a steadiness that surprised her, rediscovering how clarity sharpened creativity. In the absence of Rowan Hale's uncertainty, her thoughts moved freely. Rowan respected the distance she had asked for, though it clearly cost him. His messages were infrequent and careful, stripped of defensiveness. When he did reach out, it was to acknowledge rather than persuade. I'm in therapy, he wrote one evening. Not to fix us, to understand myself. Alara read the message twice before setting her phone aside. She felt no rush to respond. For the first time, silence belonged to her. Rowan's sessions forced him into uncomfortable stillness. Without distraction, he confronted patterns he had long avoided. How he sought novelty when emotional labor felt heavy, how he equated difficulty with failure. He did not excuse himself. He named his choices plainly. That honesty unsettled him more than guilt ever had. Sienna Voss removed herself quietly from his life. Their final conversation was brief and sober, both acknowledging that what had formed between them thrived only in borrowed space. Without secrecy, it dissolved into clarity. Sienna did not dramatize her exit. She understood the cost of blurred boundaries and chose not to add to it. Alara learned this indirectly, through Margot Hale, who remained a gentle presence without allegiance. He's trying, Margot said carefully. Not performing, actually trying. Alara appreciated the distinction. Effort meant little without accountability. Weeks later, Rowan asked if she would meet him for coffee. No expectations, he added. Just conversation. Alara agreed, surprising herself with the ease of the decision. They chose a quiet place near the river, the same stretch of water visible from their anniversary restaurant, though neither mentioned the symmetry. Rowan arrived early, standing when he saw her, uncertainty written openly across his face. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for understanding if I hadn't, she replied. They sat. The space between them felt different, not strained but defined. I owe you an apology, Rowan began. Not the kind that asks for forgiveness. The kind that acknowledges harm. Alara listened without interrupting. I didn't betray you physically, he continued, but I did something worse. I withheld myself. I gave my attention elsewhere because it felt easier than facing what our marriage needed from me. She nodded once. You made me feel invisible. I know, he said quietly, and I'm sorry. The words carried weight because they did not seek absolution. I'm not asking you to come back, Rowan added. I'm asking you to know that I finally see what I avoided. Alara studied him. He looked older somehow, not worn, but stripped of illusion. I believe you, she said. But belief isn't the same as readiness. I understand. They spoke for an hour about therapy, about boundaries, about how love could exist alongside damage. Rowan did not promise transformation. He described work. Alara did not promise reconciliation. She described boundaries. When they stood to leave, the river reflected the late afternoon light in shifting patterns. Rowan hesitated. May I walk you part of the way? She considered, then nodded. They walked in comfortable silence, no longer reaching instinctively for each other's hands. At the corner where their paths diverged, Rowan stopped. Whatever you decide, he said, I'm grateful you chose yourself, even if it cost me. Alara met his gaze. That's the first thing you've said that feels like love without possession. He smiled faintly, accepting the truth of it. After they parted, Alara continued alone, feeling neither loss nor relief, only steadiness. She realized then that healing was not about erasing pain, but about reducing its authority. That night, she sat by her window, city lights flickering below. Her phone rested beside her, untouched. She thought about the weight she had carried, the unanswered questions, the careful silence, the effort of making herself smaller to preserve peace. She no longer felt that pressure in her chest. Whether she returned to Rowan or continued forward alone remained undecided. The future had reopened, unforced. What mattered was this. The truth that once felt too big and thick to bear had finally been spoken. And in naming it, she had discovered something lighter, stronger, and undeniably her own. The freedom to choose not from fear, but from clarity.